amazing aroma, costs around $5 and is bound to make your life easier.
You may be thinking of a fancy cup of coffee, but we're talking about an irresistible store-made rotisserie chicken.
You can walk into almost any grocery store in America right now and buy a whole chicken for less than $2 a pound. That's cheaper than most vegetables, cheaper than cheese, in some places, cheaper than bottled water. And it wasn't always this way. Your grandparents grew up in a world where chicken was a luxury. It was what you served on Sundays. It was what you bought when company was coming over. Roast chicken was a special occasion. Today, Americans eat over 100 pounds of chicken per person every year. That's 3 times what their grandparents ate. And the price, adjusted for inflation, has actually gone down. So what happened? How did chicken go from a delicacy to the cheapest meat in the supermarket? The answer involves a government-sponsored beauty pageant, a 500-chick accident, a genetic revolution, and a business model so ruthless that one former Iowa prosecutor compared it to serfdom. Here's how it all went down. The modern chicken industry started, believe it or not, with a mistake. In 1923, a farmer named Cecile Steele in Ocean View, Delaware, ordered her usual 50 laying hens for the season. But the hatchery shipped 500 chicks instead. It was a take-it-or-leave-it situation. So Steele had her handyman build a tiny shed, crammed all 500 birds inside, and heated it with a wood-burning stove. 18 weeks later, 387 of those birds had survived. She sold them at 62 cents per pound, which is roughly $11 per pound in today's money. And she made a small fortune. Word got around. Within a few years, farmers across the Delmarva Peninsula were raising chickens specifically for meat. But there was a problem. These early birds were scrawny, tough, and took months to reach a sellable weight. A chicken in 1925 weighed about 2.5 pounds at market. You were basically paying premium prices for a bird that barely had enough meat on it for one meal. The industry needed a bigger bird, and in 1945, they decided to build one. The Chicken of Tomorrow contest might be the strangest government project you've never heard of. It was organized by the USDA and sponsored by A&P, which at the time was the largest grocery chain in America. The goal was simple: breed a chicken that grows bigger, grows faster, and converts feed into meat more efficiently. The timing wasn't random. During World War II, beef and pork had been rationed and shipped overseas to feed troops. Chicken consumption had spiked as a result. And when the war ended, the industry wanted to keep that momentum going. They needed a bird that could feed an entire family at a price lower than red meat. The contest launched in 1946 with state competitions, moved to regionals in 1947, and climaxed with a national finals at the University of Delaware in 1948. Farmers and breeders from 44 states submitted 720 eggs each to be hatched and raised under identical conditions. The chicks were tracked, weighed, and eventually slaughtered and judged on how much usable meat they produced. The winning genetics came from 2 breeders, Henry Saglio's Arbor Acres, White Rocks, and Charles Vantress's Red Cornish crosses. And here's the part that matters. Those 2 bloodlines were eventually merged. Today, Arbor Acres is owned by a company called Aviagen, and Vantress is owned by Cobb Vantress, which is a subsidiary of Tyson Foods. Between those 2 companies, they supply the breeding stock for virtually every one of the 9 billion broiler chickens raised in the United States each year, and billions more around the world. 2 companies, controlling the genetics of nearly every chicken on Earth. That contest in 1948 didn't just change what we eat. It created a duopoly that most people don't even know exists. But the genetics were only the beginning. What happened next was an engineering project on a biological scale. In the 1950s, a broiler chicken took about 70 days to reach a market weight of 3 pounds. Farmers fed roughly 3 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of meat. Today, a broiler reaches about 6 pounds in just 47 days. Some operations get them to market weight in as little as 35 days, and the feed conversion ratio has dropped to about 1.7 pounds of grain per pound of meat. So the chicken got twice as heavy in almost half the time, while eating nearly half the feed. That isn't a small improvement. That's one of the most dramatic transformations in the history of agriculture. Researchers at the University of Alberta ran a study in 2014 comparing chickens from 1957, 1978, and 2005, all raised under identical conditions. The 2005 birds were 4 times heavier than the 1957 birds at the same age. Their breast muscles alone were 80% larger. And none of this involved steroids or hormones. The FDA actually banned the use of hormones in poultry back in the late 1950s. This was done entirely through selective breeding. Chickens reproduce fast. A single hen can produce 120 chicks a year and start breeding after just 25 weeks. That gives breeders an enormous population to select from, generation after generation, always picking the birds that grow fastest and convert feed most efficiently. The result is a chicken that barely resembles its ancestors. Modern broilers grow so fast that their legs often can't support their own body weight. Heart disease and respiratory problems are common, but from a production standpoint, the math works. More meat, less feed, less time. And that means a lower price at the register. So you've got a bird that's been genetically optimized for cheap production. But cheap genetics alone don't explain $2 a pound chicken. The real innovation wasn't biological, it was financial. And it's called vertical integration. Starting in the 1940s and accelerating through the 1950s, poultry companies began buying up every stage of the supply chain. The hatcheries, the feed mills, the slaughterhouses, the trucking lines. Today, 4 companies control roughly 60% of the American chicken market: Tyson, Pilgrim's Pride, Perdue, and Sanderson Farms. And they don't just process chicken, they own the entire pipeline from genetics to grocery shelf. But here's what makes the model so effective at keeping prices down. The companies don't actually own the farms. Over 99% of chickens raised in the United States are grown by independent farmers working under contract with these corporations. The company provides the chicks, the feed, the veterinary services, and the technical guidance. The farmer provides everything else: the land, the buildings, the utilities, the labor, the manure management, and most importantly, the debt. To become a contract chicken grower, a farmer typically has to build specialized barns to the company's exact specifications. That means taking out a loan of $1 million or more, often putting their home and land up as collateral. The contract they sign in return? Sometimes it only guarantees the next flock of birds, 6 weeks of work, no long-term security. In 1950, 95% of broiler farms in America were independent. By 1955, just 5 years later, that number had collapsed to 10%. The independent chicken farmer essentially disappeared in a single decade, and the contract system itself has a feature that keeps costs relentlessly low. It's called the tournament. Here's how it works. The company assigns a group of farmers to deliver birds to the same processing plant during the same period. When the birds are weighed and processed, the company calculates an average cost for the group. Farmers who performed above average get a bonus. Farmers who perform below average get penalized. Your paycheck depends not just on how well you raised your birds, but on how well your neighbors raised theirs. On the surface, it sounds like a merit-based system, but the farmer doesn't control most of the variables. The company decides which chicks to send. The company formulates the feed. The company provides the medication. If you get a weak batch of chicks or subpar feed, your performance drops, and so does your pay. And multiple farmers have reported that when they complain or push back, the next flock they receive just happens to perform worse. As comedian John Oliver put it, you own everything that costs money. They own everything that makes money. In 2022, the median household income from poultry farming was negative $4,069. The farmers were paying for the privilege of raising someone else's chickens. Contract growers' total debt hit $5.2 billion, and two-thirds of growers carried significant debt loads. New farmers, the ones who just signed their first contract and took out that $1 million loan, averaged debt equal to 51% of their total assets. Some carried debt at 77% or more. A farmer in Arkansas described the experience like this. You start with a dream of running your own farm, then you realize you're just an employee with no rights, no voice, and no way out. So that's the recipe. Take a bird that's been selectively bred for 75 years to grow twice as fast on half the feed. Raise it in a system where a handful of corporations control every input from genetics to slaughter. Outsource the most expensive and risky part, the actual farming, to independent growers who absorb the debt and the liability while the company keeps the birds and the profit margins. Pit those farmers against each other in a payment system that rewards the company whether any individual farmer succeeds or fails. And at the end of all that, you get a whole chicken for less than the price of a cup of coffee at Starbucks. It's worth noting that the system is so efficient and the conditions so different from what's standard elsewhere that American-raised chicken cannot be sold in most of Europe. The processing methods, the density of the barns, the use of chlorine washes at the end of the line, all of it falls outside European food safety standards. The average American eats chicken 3 times more often than their grandparents did. McDonald's now sells as much chicken as beef. Wendy's CFO said it plainly in a recent earnings call. Beef and fries are inflationary for us. Chicken is deflationary. And that word, deflationary, tells you everything. Chicken is cheap because the system was designed from the ground up to make it cheap. Every inefficiency has been squeezed out. Every cost that could be shifted to the farmer has been shifted to the farmer. Every bird that could grow faster has been bred to grow faster. The question isn't really how chicken got so cheap. The question is who paid the price to make it that way.